This podcast may feature adult language. All opinions stated are solely those of the person speaking and do not necessarily reflect those of Gamers Tavern or any company our guests may be affiliated with. Discretion is advised. So, you all meet in a tavern. In a dark quarter, sitting at a table is a man dressed all in black. Your host, Darryl Mott Jr.
And a bald man holding a sign that says Adventurers Wanted. I'm Ross Watson.
And with us tonight at the Gamers Tavern, we have John Kovalic.
Good evening. I am a cartoonist. I've drawn Munchkin. I've drawn Apples to Apples. I create the comic strip Dork Tower. I've illustrated over 100 games and gaming supplements. And I'm looking trepidatiously around the tavern.
Yeah, John may have drawn a few things you might know from various places. It's hard for me to imagine a gamer who doesn't know John's art.
And speaking of things that most gamers know, if you've played D&D in the last 15 or 20 years or so, you know Bruce Cordell, who's a legendary game designer of many modules. Bruce, go ahead and say hello.
Hi, there's a man who walks in who's got an axe over one shoulder and a goblin head on his belt. I'm Bruce Cordell, and I've been writing D&D and other games for, probably 20 years, actually. D&D for 18 years, and as someone said earlier, they hate the Tomb of Horrors. I wrote the Return to the Tomb of Horrors, so yeah, that's me. And most recently, I actually just quit Wizards and started working with my old friend Monty, and we're doing fun things there.
Numenera.
Another gamer you might have heard of, Monty.
Yes.
And we also have with us today a former editor for Wizards of the Coast, Torah Cottrill. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi. Well, I slink into the bar with a red pin strapped to my belt and a knife in my boot. Hey guys, need an editor? I was the associate managing editor at Wizards for a lot of 4E products and also for ENWorld, which is one of my favorites. I worked for a while at NCSoft, where I wrote some online stuff for City of Heroes, one of my favorite MMOs. And what am I doing?
You're writing short stories these days.
That's right. I'm a fantasy and sci-fi novelist. And I'm working on making a card game that will probably never be as popular as Munchkin.
So, Torah, I see here that in your little bio that you answered a Craigslist ad to work at WotC. Is that
true.
Right?
Back then, when I was growing up, unlike Bruce's experience, girls weren't really welcome at the gaming table, and so I was not as familiar with D&D then as I am now. So when I answered the ad, I didn't really know much about the game, but they taught me.
I'm hoping that the Craigslist ad was under random encounters.
That's the truth.
So what was it about the ad that drew your attention, and what was it? Did they say you'll be editing games, or did they just say you'll be editing?
Well, when I looked up what Wizards of the Coast was, I saw Kim Mohan's name. And I knew Kim Mohan as a science fiction editor.
Amazing stories.
Yes, very anxious to work with him.
So, I just want to make sure and welcome everybody to episode 1 of You All Meet in a Tavern. This is the inaugural episode, so you guys are actually, really special, extra special guests. And we want to ask the listeners to kind of bear with us a little bit as we kind of still figure out how this whole podcasting thing works. But Darryl, why don't you tell them about what the show's about tonight?
Tonight, basically a celebration of why we love gaming, what got us into gaming, why we're so passionate about this hobby, because for the most part, none of us here are in it for the money. So we're all here because we love this industry, we love this hobby, and we're wanting to kind of explore why that is, what it is about this hobby that draws us all in. So let's go ahead and start with something. What was the first moment that really got you hooked on gaming? Not necessarily the first game you played, but kind of the first moment beyond like Monopoly and Clue and playing Cowboys and Indians and that sort of thing. The first moment where you realized that there was something here.
Okay. For me, I was born in Manchester. This is John here. I was born in Manchester, England. I grew up most of my life in the United Kingdom, as you can tell from the extraordinarily strong accent. As a kid, I went to a school in the county of Rutland called Neville Holt. This was a school which was the ancestral home of the Neville family. Anybody who's played Kingmaker will probably know the Neville family. And in this school, history, it was a very small school, but history just was all around you. There were hiding places in this stately home where the royalists would hide from the Roundheads, and you would be taught this during history. And I remember so clearly playing during breaks with these little Airfix figures, the 1/72nd scale plastic figures, Desert Rats and the Africa Corps. And just as kids, you've got these little toy soldiers. And they were fantastic. My next school, I went to a school in the county of Somerset called Millfield, and there were some kids playing with these soldiers, but they had rules for these toy soldiers. These 1/72nd scale tanks, these model kits you could build, these toy soldiers you could buy at any little shop in England. And there were rules, and you could roll dice, and you could see how far your troops could move. And this was amazing to me. This was fantastic. This was brilliant. I loved making these models. I loved painting these models. I loved this whole British schoolboy thing with, World War II and Monty and the Desert Fox and who do you think you're kidding, Mr. Hitler, etc., etc. And all of a sudden, here were rules. And this was brilliant. This was amazing. And holy cow, within weeks, I was painting my armies and bringing them to this gaming club at the school. This would have been probably 1975, 76-ish, something like that. And I would go to these modeling stores, a store called Beatty's, which was in the town of Bristol, England. And there was an old SPI game called Panzer 44. And I had no idea that war games existed. I just had this, I don't know if any of you guys remember these old flat SPI.
The old Avalon Hill and all of those?
Yes, but these were the SPI. Yeah, this was that era. And SPI produced these flat games in these flat boxes, which essentially were giant counter trays with rules and a map. And I pulled out this game.
And chits.
And chits, yes, chits. Oh, wither chits. Let me tell you about the chits, my son.
And a chit store.
The cover of this game just essentially said, the time is November 1944. The place is the Ardennes, and you are in command. And that just fired my imagination. So I started getting into war games, and war games led me, these board games led me to a little shop in London on Dowling Road called Games Workshop. And this was the very first Games Workshop shop, when Games Workshop didn't do any of their own stuff. It was this brilliant game store. And my parents would drive from Bristol to London so we could have a day in London. And I would make sure, and they were fantastic, they would make sure, they would indulge me, and we would stop in Hammersmith at Dowling Road at this little shop. And I would walk into the shop, and it was packed with hobby games. The hobby games of the day. There was RuneQuest. There were these miniatures. Was first and foremost my gig back then. But there was this tiny little box, a little white box labeled Dungeons and Dragons. Tiny, small thing. And Games Workshop had printed up photocopied a little leaflet. What is role playing? And there was the map, and there was what you see in so many games, especially in the 80s and 90s, every role-playing game had this little script where, Dungeon Master, you go into a room, and there's the map beside you. Player 1, I look around. And again, this just blew my 14, 15-year-old mind. I bought this little white box, I took it back to Somerset, and the next week, me and my friends had a gaming group set up in school, and that was it. Everything, just like bam, bam, bam.
So it was the example of play that kind of sucked you in.
That was what made it so very important. I mean, right away, I saw what it was about. You know, if it had just been this little white box, okay, that first little Dungeons and Dragons white box, the art was horrible. I mean, it was really, really bad. I mean, I think that it was...
It was a unique style, to give it a little bit of credit.
I think you're using the term style extraordinarily loosely here, but generously. And yeah, there was the wizard...
I'm using unique very, very accurately, though.
Classic. We can say classic.
There we go.
There were pens involved, and there was some paper involved. But yeah, it was that first example of play. And, you know, thank goodness the little Games Workshop is this little store in London printed this up. Because I got it right away. I could not wait to get back to school and start playing this with my friends.
Wow, that's a great story. So, you know, historical wargaming into Games Workshop into the example of play. That's a really interesting path.
Yeah, my gaming... I do everything. I still do everything. I still love the historical games. I still love the role-playing. I adore board games, card games, absolutely every facet of gaming I'm into.
And one look at your Wikipedia page and people can tell you have a very broad base of games. So what about you, Torah? When did you know that you were hooked on gaming?
Well, I worked for, back then it was called Harper Brace Jovanovich, in the late 80s as an editor. And this was before most corporations had internet. We had the corporate intranet. And I was digging around on the intranet one day, and I found somebody had this game, this text-based game. And if you could figure out the right way to phrase your moves, I open the door. I run from the dragon. I pick up the gold coins. I turn left. It was fantastic. I must have wasted hundreds of corporate hours playing this game. And for me, because I'm an avid reader, and the idea of being able to participate in the kinds of things that I read was fascinating. And I enjoyed D&D when I first started playing it when I worked at WotC, but I think I didn't really get it until I worked at NCSoft and I started playing City of Heroes. And the moment that I realized I could fly, it changed the way I thought about what you can do in games. It turned it into a three-dimensional experience, and it was awesome.
That is a great story.
Well, I gotta say, for me personally, it was Heroquest, which kind of brings us back to 40K in a way. I was always into games. I haven't stopped playing games since I was old enough to figure out Candyland. I got into this game called Heroquest, which was a Milton Bradley game that was, I can't remember who held the license in the US aside from Milton Bradley, but it was based off of Games Workshop's Warhammer, not 40K, but Warhammer universe. And it was this like dungeon crawly, the closest equivalent I can find today is Descent, but I still remember I played it like 2 or 3 times. I was like, yeah, this is kind of fun. And then we went over to spend the night over at a friend's house, and me and his brother and myself sat at the table from about 3 in the afternoon until 7 the next morning, playing through these scenarios he was coming up with off the top of his head. And I lived in you can't play D&D because that's devil worship area. So I wasn't allowed to play D&D, but I was allowed to play Heroquest because even though it was pretty much a rip-off of D&D, only with miniatures and a set board and stuff, it didn't say Dungeons and Dragons on it. So I was allowed to play that.
Well, yeah, technically it's a board game, that uses scenarios, but it is very, very similar to the tabletop experience.
It is, and it isn't in a way. It doesn't have a lot of the role-playing elements, but that's what my friend's brother did. Was he was a D&D player, and so he introduced all these role-playing elements of. So what aside from what was just in the scenario and in the rules, like talking to people that were in the game, talking to the monsters, talking to the NPCs, stuff like that. And that night, it was just like, Oh, that would sound better if I could actually sing and hit a key, but that was the chorus of angels letting me know that this was something that must do for the rest of my natural life.
One day we will afford a soundboard and we will have sound effects on it.
With the chorus of angels.
So that's. What about you, Bruce? How did you get into the? When did you find out that you knew that you were in love with the hobby of gaming?
I think that began when I was in Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, all that, and we always go to these various camps. And one summer camp, in the middle of summer, middle of the night, the older scouts were sitting around the lantern lit picnic table, out in the middle of the wilderness, and they were sitting around playing some game. So I walked over to watch, and they had out all this geomorphic graph paper, and one guy was talking about, okay, you guys look around the corner and you see this ogre squatting in the middle of this stone corridor. He's got a pile of tied up dwarves next to him, and he picks up a dwarf and he puts it in his mouth and he just pulls it out and throws the bones like fish bones away. And you are tied up next to the dwarves. What do you do? And I was like, oh my God, what's going on here? And all the players are like freaking out and like, oh my God, I try and get free. Oh, I try and cut the rope, and I try and do this, I try and do that. And the dungeon master is talking about, okay, he picks up your friend Bernie, and he, picks him up by the toes. And I was just, obviously I was like, what is this? Dungeons and Dragons. And after that I went home and I had my parents buy me the box set, and started, got all my younger Cub Scouts playing with me, and the rest is history.
I've got to ask, Bruce, which one did you start with?
I started with the blue box with the chits instead of actual dice. They didn't have dice yet. They had dice, perhaps. I'm not sure. They were supposed to have dice, but I got a coupon for dice and chits that I had pulled out and put in Dixie cups before, and then 6 months or so later, they sent me the set of that white, green, and red dice in the mail that were useful for a few years before they crumbled from use. And the crayons, of course, which you put the crayon into the numbers to actually see the numbers.
Awesome. Well, I got started with the red box, the Metzner red box. My dad bought it for me when I was probably 8 years old. And as soon as he brought that home and started telling me, okay, here's the way you can basically play The Hobbit instead of reading The Hobbit, that kind of blew my young mind, and I spent probably the next 4 or 5 months trying to figure out how to play it by myself, which didn't work out too well. But once I figured out that you needed a group to play it, and I got people involved in it, it was the moment where my imagination kind of unlocked and opened up like a big butterfly.
Okay, so here's the next logical question. We all had that, as I described it, the chorus of angels moment, that moment where we realized that this was something awesome. But what is it about gaming that makes it something that attracts so many people so passionately towards it as a hobby? What drew you to gaming specifically, aside from just, was it the storytelling, was it the strategy, was it the being able to take on the role of being able to live the life of Aragorn for a few moments? Or let's go ahead and start with Bruce this time.
Okay, well, I think that from my perspective, first it was a sense of agency, but my very first experience was getting then the game itself and then deciding what's, building the world, right? You have the power to create this entire cosmos, starting, a brick or a building or a room at a time, but it's as big as you imagine it to be, and it contains whatever you want it to contain. And when you have players go through it, it takes on a life, right? So it's like you're in a way sort of a creator. So that really, I think, maybe I'm some sort of power mad egomaniac, but that's what I like about it. I mean, I enjoy playing as well, but
for some reason right now I am picturing Calvin playing with the Tinker Toys.
I, for one, welcome our new role-playing overlords.
Okay, Ross, what is it about role-playing that drew you to it, or tabletop gaming, board games, whatever?
Well, there's a really big combination of things about role-playing that appeal to me, but if I had to pick just one, it would be that ability to communicate with a group of people the same idea and kind of have them build that collaboratively with you. the magic for me really kicked in when we started sort of building that world together with and expanding on one person's idea, not just the DM sort of telling us all what we were doing, but being allowed to take part in that and collaboratively construct a really cool shared experience that we can all look back on later. I mean, I think that's one of the best things about role playing is you can always talk to people and go, you remember that time when we destroyed the Lich with the gem of seeing, and they're like, oh yeah, that was awesome. So it's really, for me, it kind of about, what you remember about it and what you take away from it.
So it's kind of the sort of collaborative storytelling where you go to a con in half a world away and you sit there and talk. It's like, oh, I played this module. And then everyone's like, oh yeah, I remember that when this happened. It's like, oh yeah, and I did this, and oh, I did this. And was that what really appealed to you in a way, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's definitely one of the strengths about things like, I'm sure Bruce understands, like Tomb of Horrors, and people say, well, did you jump through the demon's mouth?
I claim to fame as a DM, got a group to jump through that damn mouth 3 fucking times.
I've personally jumped through that mouth myself, and it was, that was the end of our party.
But for me, that's a really awesome thing that all of us can actually talk about that same experience and how we approached it differently.
I think he's talking, what he's saying, you're talking, Darryl, about the commonality that we all have by sharing a similar hobby, but it sounds to me like Ross is actually a lot more people-oriented than my answer was. It's the exploration as a group, right? It's the role-playing game as the group, as you're in there with comrades and you're creating something together.
Yeah, but it's okay if we have different answers.
Sure, no, oh, totally.
That's what's great about the hobby is there's so many different ways to approach, and that's what I'm kind of curious to explore here. Is my personal experience is I kind of come from it from all the angles at once. Is I really love the strategic elements of gameplay when I'm a player. I really like, okay, if I shift to this square and then I get flanking, and that's how like 3rd and 4th edition D&D and a lot of the other really combat oriented. I actually came into the hobby through Shadowrun, believe it or not. Heroquest was my entry vector. Shadowrun was my I also got into Battletech, and then that got me into Shadowrun, and Shadowrun was my first full-fledged role-playing game where I actually played a character. And Shadowrun is a very awesome setting with a lot of fiction that I did not realize when I was 13 years old. I was more concerned with having a pink mohawk and cyberspurs like Wolverine. I much more got into for Shadowrun fans, it's called the Black Trenchcoat style play. It's basically you're playing a cyberpunk urban fantasy version of the TV show Leverage when you play that way. But that's how I got into that's what really attracted me to it. But I also had a lot of fun with telling stories with people and that strategy game, and it was a way for me to do something social, because otherwise I would sit in my room and play Legend of Zelda or Madden football all repeatedly over and over again, except for I was the kind of min-maxy power gamer. I would sit there and play like the 3-time Super Bowl winning Dallas Cowboys versus the team that ended with an 0-15 record in football, and just crush them over and over again, running the same play repeatedly.
See, my problem with those games was I would always lose to the team that was 0-15 with the Pittsburgh Steelers from 1976-77. I'm no good at those games, is what I'm saying.
I should definitely amend my earlier response and say, it's okay for us to have different answers unless you're in the Tomb of Horrors, in which case there is only one answer.
You die?
You all die. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually... I got to bring up the Tomb of Horrors thing. This is a little tangent side story thing. I have the Tomb of Horrors for every single edition for D&D it's been published. One thing that you can tell that my group of players has pissed me off for the last time, I will pull out whatever edition appropriate version of Tomb of Horrors there is, the hardest difficulty, and say, okay, you guys find out about this tomb that has all these enchanted magical items, and I will run them through Tomb of Horrors.
After the 3rd or 4th time, doesn't the word tomb do anything to them. I mean, you have to call it the ice cream stand. You hear about this ice cream stand? There's treasure in this ice cream stand. And
I never tell them where they're going until they're already died 3 times going in the wrong entrance.
you seek out the fluffy bunnies of love. You open the door and you die!
Okay, this brings up a question I have died to ask you, John, for ages. What is the deal with the fucking duck?
Why a duck? Why not a duck?
Is this like an inside joke thing that
Why
I
not
just don't
Zoidberg?
get? I don't have the reference for. I am out of all the people on this podcast today, I am probably the youngest person, except for maybe Torah. I'm not sure how old you are. You definitely look younger than me.
Bless you.
But seriously, am I missing something, or is this just a thing that you guys threw in that it's like, hey, that's hilarious, let's keep it?
That you see, the first Munchkin, the original box set, very, very first one, 11 years ago, 12 years ago now, was extraordinarily poultry-centric. There was the chicken on your head, there was the giant angry chicken, and there was the Duck of Doom. And honestly, I have really never thought to ask Steve, but I find myself drawing many, many ducks.
And wearing them on your head while biking 70 miles or whatever it was you just did.
Yes. Well, yeah, I did a charity bike ride. It was, and I had to ride 70 miles in a day, and I had $2,000 dollars pledged from Munchkin players around the world, and then I said, well, look, if I ride with a Duck of Doom on my head, I will do this if you raise $3,000. And they actually raised $4,000. And so, yes, I cycled with the plush Duck of Doom on my bicycle helmet. And the problem was, it was raining, and this plush duck was absorbent. So it got heavier and heavier. And it was really cute, and it was very funny. And the legend of the duck kind of grew because, thanks to Munchkin players around the world, I was by far and away the bike rider with the largest fundraising effort. And so everybody was coming up and congratulating me as they were passing me on their bikes because I was weighed down by this goddamn duck.
For some reason, I always thought it was like a sly RuneQuest reference.
Actually, well, you'd have to ask Steve about that specifically, but duck does... A lot of people think that Dork Tower is based on Stephen King's Dark Tower. It's not. It is actually based not on the RuneQuest Dark Tower, but on RuneQuest's Duck Tower. I don't know if any of you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
So the duck, ducks in their various forms have been extraordinarily influential in my career. So I am not going to question the duck.
No, I wouldn't either.
John, what is it that drew you to gaming?
Yeah, it was pretty much just for the immediate mind-blowing ability to create worlds and have your friends play in these worlds. I was always much more the dungeon master than the role player. I don't think I'm a terrific role player. I tend to fall back on a dwarven tank when forced to role play. But I love the world building aspect, and I just adored being able to break out the hex paper and trace out the continents of a world. I think every schoolboy in the 1970s had their evil empire was surrounded by mountains, a la Tolkien, and
of course.
It was brilliant. It was just absolutely. I keep going back to the word mind-blowing, but it truly was. It was this wonderful form of creation, of expression, which, when you're 13, 14, 15, you're going to write some really bad poetry. You're going to write some really shitty fiction. But your friends are probably going to love your role-playing world, and you're going to have a great time with this.
I was a Vampire the Masquerade player when I was 14, 15, 16, so there's a reason I don't let anyone see my poetry.
I'd love to go back and look at my maps from that era and see what they said about me at the time. I think that'd be really cool.
I've got them, and honestly, I have this thought every now and then just to get somebody like Pelgrane Press or some of my pals and get them to do them up properly. Make them look really awesome. And
Dude, seriously, just scan them and put them online. I'd fucking buy them right now. John Kovalic, the early years.
I have mine too, but they're all such hybrids of like the land of Conan and Samaria and mashed with Terry Brooks' Shannara. It's just, it's very derivative when I was like 12.
It's very derivative, but I was like 12 is every 12-year-old's saying.
Torah, what is the thing about games that you find the most appealing?
I am going to disagree with the entire group. I'm a gaming nihilist. I enjoy the part where you get to define yourself in any way you want to. I'm not a very big person, and I can be a tiefling, I can be an ogre, I can be a wicked fairy with sharp teeth, and I can do my best to game outside the box. So if somebody gives me a fortress with a big door, I really, really want to sneak around the back and throw fireballs inside. I like being able to be something different. I like role-playing and I like strategy. I like the way that I can become something more than I am every day.
That's a great answer. Unconventional responses and figuring out, different ways to get to the goal. I think those are all fantastic reasons to role play.
I had a friend I was talking to online the other day. I was saying I fought a dragon the other day and we killed it. I mean, it was me and 20 other people, but we killed it. And I was very excited. He made me a poster and said, just because it's in all real life doesn't mean it wasn't hard. And it's true. You have to put a lot of thought into it. And I enjoy that.
So it's the sort of escapism thing, getting away from the normal life and living in this other world for a few moments in this other person's body.
And problem solving.
It's problem solving. It's letting yourself become really, really good at something that you don't use every day.
Speaking of things you use every day, how has gaming kind of influenced your life outside of actually playing games? Aside from, obviously, except for me, everyone here's career has been kind of defined by gaming. How have you guys really seen gaming bleed into the normal life? In that, I know for me, when I go to the office, I work this crappy day job. I'm probably going to put the word crappy out because I don't think my bosses are going to listen to this because they make fun of me for gaming, but...
Your bosses still make fun of you for gaming? Where have they been the last... Don't they realize you're the cool kid now?
No, here's the thing. They sit there and talk about what level they are on Candy Crush for 2 fucking hours, and then make fun of me because I'm like, oh, hey, I need to try to finish my work as early as I can so I can get home and plan for my D&D game. Oh, nerd. And I'm like, go fuck you. That's the world I live in right now, which is kind of why I wanted to start this podcast, was so I could talk with people who understand my pain.
This is all about therapy for Darryl. I understand now.
But for me, it's everything I do is in some way, shape, or form a game. It's to the point where I'm at my desk at the day job, and I get up and go get coffee, and we have this weird tile pattern on the floor, and it's, okay, your right foot and your left foot have to step on the white tiles the same number of times as you walk by. And this may be an OCD thing, I don't know. I don't think I'm OCD.
Don't step on the red ones, they're lava.
Exactly. And like I said, I'm not sure if it's an OCD thing. I don't think it is, considering how much of a slob I am, but step on the white tiles as many times on each foot as you do, because they alternate with the off gray ones, and there's the dark gray ones those are the special ones. They're only in certain places because they patch the back hallway in a weird way.
Tiles, the stepping.
That's a game I play walking to go get coffee in the morning. Almost all my social circle is built up of people that I play games with. Everyone I associate with in any way, shape, or form, even up to and including the people I date. It's oh, hey, I do this thing. And they're like, hey, that's kind of... And I'm like, okay, I'm done with you. I have no interest in you anymore because you just kind of sneered at this thing I
Well,
love.
Darryl, let me describe to you what's happening in my house right now. So as we're talking, downstairs, my son is playing Skyrim.
Woo!
My daughters are collaborating on Minecraft. And up until we started this podcast, Bruce and I were
We're
fighting,
playing Guild Wars.
playing
too.
Guild Wars.
Yeah. So gaming is a big part of the.
Gaming is a big part of every day in this house.
Yeah, and of course, as Torah said before, to answer your question from my perspective as well, obviously we date, so that's how it's gaming has affected, our lives. It's like, hey, like you were just saying, Darryl, if you meet someone who actually shares your interest, that can be pretty cool.
But gaming has really shaped your whole life, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's true.
So that's life in Bruce and Torah's household. Ross, how does gaming sort of influence your day-to-day life?
Well, if there's one thing I've learned from role-playing games, it's courage. I say that in my superhero voice, but seriously, I went through 4 years in the U.S. Army. I was overseas in Korea, and I went through some, pretty tough challenges. Not only just getting through training, but doing some. There was a U.S. cavalryman challenge thing that I had to go through over there as well. I looked a North Korean officer, straight in the eye at Panmunjom and things like that. And these are not, things I think that most people would look at with eagerness. Going into those things, I basically just imagine, what would my character do if he was a fighter? What would my character do if he was, a lawful good paladin on a quest? And it didn't take long for me to sort of internalize that. And the choices that you make as your character, I think they can actually really inform, and tell you more about yourself. If Sir Larimar wouldn't give up, then I'm not going to give up.
That does bring up an interesting sort of related question. Ross obviously just spoke about his military service. One thing I have noticed is that at least it may be the people that I'm interacting with, but it seems like every single military person I've run into is in some way, shape, or form a gamer. And it may have to do with, war games, or it may be something that I'm stuck at this boring ass APO and I have nothing else to do. This guy has a D&D set, so I'm going to play that. John, Bruce, Torah, do any of you have military backgrounds?
None, and both of my respective countries are fortunate because of that. I would have made an awful, awful soldier, and I absolutely respect the people who go into this, and many of my friends, my dad was a Marine. My dad volunteered to go to Korea during the Korean War. It's like, really, Dad? That's awesome. Why? And, so I've got a huge, huge amount of respect for these folks. And, a lot of, when we did the Shea Geek game, Shea Grunt, there was, one of the spin-off games of Shea Geek. And that was, kind of Steve Jacks's thank you to the folks who serve. And I had a wonderful time with that, going to, talk with military folks, trying to get, even though it's a cartoon, a very comic, kind of style of mine, trying to make this stuff respectful and accurate. But yeah, I think both I and all of my friends who have served realized I would have made a terrible, terrible soldier. And we're all thankful I instead decided to draw a funny animal.
My brother was in the Navy, and I've spent probably 15 years on military bases myself, on and off. And I think a lot of the reason that military people enjoy gaming is because there are large groups of people who are the same age together with lots of free time. And so gaming is a great way to use up that free time and to do something that doesn't cost a lot of money. And so I think a lot of the games now that emphasize, being able to give copies of their games to people overseas it's a great way to encourage the hobby among people who might not otherwise have encountered it.
You nailed it, Torah. That's my experience as well.
Bruce, did you have something along the lines with either John or Ross?
I have not been in the military. My father was in the military. He was in Vietnam, but yeah, that's.
Was he a gamer?
He played D&D once. I played with him and my mom, and after he realized what was happening, he said, "Okay, we go here, we go here, we go here, and we go here." I go, "But that means you leave the dungeon, Dad." He goes, "That's right."
My father missed the Vietnam War by enrolling in college, and he came to visit us last month, and for the first time saw us playing Numenera and realized what it was that I do for a living and what Bruce
And was
does.
fascinated.
And was really interested.
Yeah, that's right.
I was glad to be able to show him what role playing looks like.
Oh man, that's great. I have a quick story too. My dad, he introduced me to role playing, but he never actually gamed with me for a really really long time. And then a couple of years ago, I got a chance to bring him in, and we played a game of Torg together, and then we played a game of Feng Shui. And what was really interesting is, I like to say, you can tell a lot about a person from the characters that they play sometimes. My dad, he's a real straight arrow. He's a very upstanding citizen. He's actually helped track down thieves and stuff like that before in his life. And when we start playing Feng Shui, he picks the everyman hero. And I say, "Okay, Dad, well, I'm a cop, and my buddy's here is playing a cop, and you're playing the everyman hero, so what is your character's real job?" And my dad thinks about it for a couple of minutes, and he looks around the table, and he looks at me, he says, "I think my character is a drug dealer."
Excellent. That's role playing.
I about fell out of my chair.
I've got this nightmarish image right now of me playing a game of Fiasco with my parents. Not gonna happen.
Is this a fantasy, or is this a real thing that actually happened, John?
This is just an image that has popped into my head, and it will never ever happen.
I was thinking about the way that we think about role playing, and the way that we talk about our parents, because our parents didn't do this. Well, my children do, but my father read The Hobbit to us when I was 8. Over a series of winter evenings. So he really was taken with the idea of a fantasy world and shared that with me. But I don't think he had the circle or the kind of opportunities that we have growing up to express this in a gaming way. And I think we're very fortunate.
Well, that's a good point, because now that you say that, my probably fascination with this sort of crazy world came from my mom, because she was a science fiction reader, and she had a house full of books, right? And she had a lot of books, but every 2 weeks she'd go to the library and get a new pile of science fiction books, and she would read them, I would read them, she'd bring them back the next day, so I probably have my mom to thank for my appreciation of the fantastic and crazy. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
My mother was kind of the same way. I grew up in a bookstore, and when I say the word literally, I'm not misusing the word. From when I was 5 years old until I was 21 years old, my mother owned a new and used bookstore.
Oh.
Excellent.
Growing up the entire time, my mother read to me constantly. And I still remember 2 things she read to me repeatedly. It was something both of us enjoyed, were Choose Your Own Adventures.
Oh, yeah.
And Encyclopedia Brown.
I remember those.
And this may have influenced my early mindset when it comes to getting involved in gaming, because I had that combination of, okay, this is what happens. You have these 2 choices. What do you do? As well as the problem-solving aspects of, those old Encyclopedia Brown books. In my mind, constantly growing up for years. And I'm actually the guy who read The Hobbit as a 20-something when I was born in 1980. So, fantasy has never really been a big part of my life until, I really got into D&D when it came into, about 3rd edition. That's when I really started getting into fantasy and fantasy fiction and everything else. And really, it was the Lord of the Rings movies that got me into fantasy. But
Do you think that's a common theme among people who like to role play, to game, is the idea of setting plus solving problems?
possibly, I'm not sure. I just don't have the data on that, to be honest. But it
makes
seems
a lot
like,
of sense to me.
Exactly. That's what I said when I kind of attack it of all angles for what draws me to gaming, is that I get to live in another world, in another life. Someone who may be radically different from me. Someone who is actually charming. But I always like these dexterous, swashbuckling characters because it's something that I'm not.
Well, and I'm not 6 feet tall and I don't have a broadsword, but I enjoy that too.
Exactly, and that's the escapism part of it, is living in another life. I like the world building aspect. I like sitting there and creating a new world. I like creating all these stories and tales and kind of crafting them and going with the flow with the players. It's like, okay, you just went completely off script. What do I do now? I adjust what's happening.
Here's the thing, though, I think with all of gaming, not just role-playing. Obviously my career's kind of spanned a little bit of everything. Right now, career-wise, mostly what I'm doing, much of what I'm doing are party games or these card games. But the one thing which is amazing about gaming, which I think is so undervalued these days, is simply the interaction between people, whether it's in a role-playing game, whether it's over a historical miniatures board game and you're moving pieces of lead, whether it's Warhammer 40K, whether it's a military historical game, whether it's a card game, whether it's a party game, apples to apples or wits and wagers, or any of these things. I think just getting a group of people around a table and having some tactile experience with cards or miniatures or pen and paper, pencil and paper, rolling up characters, whatever. This is something which is so, on a certain level, is so incredibly lacking these days. So much interaction is online. I know so many of my friends are online, and I will go on Twitter. I will occasionally, throw some stuff up at Facebook or whatever. But actually gathering friends around you, gathering people around you, and being able to laugh and enjoy yourselves and forget everything else for an hour or two. To me, this is what keeps me gaming. This is this amazing ability to just let people enjoy themselves for this little period of time and forget all of the worries about, adulthood, about high school, about whatever. My God, this is fantastic. This is so absolutely wonderful, and we're all part of this, and we all can bring friends together and just engage in this wonderful, wonderful activity.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I see the guy at the bar, though, is kind of giving me the eye. I think we've stayed too long without ordering around, so we might have to step outside for a minute.
I think Bruce and Torah, you guys need to head out. Is that right?
I think the bartender actually knows it, and he's giving me the sign. So I think we better make ourselves scarce.
It's been really nice to meet you guys. Thanks.
Yeah, it was really nice to meet you, Ross and John, actually.
I'll cause a distraction.
Oh, okay. We slip out. We slip out the back door.
It was great having you guys. Thank you. Is there anything you would like to tell us about that you're working on currently?
Before I escape, I will say, I'm working on the Numenera Bestiary is one of the main things I'm working on right now, although I am also working on something brand new, which will see the light of day in the future.
And if we want to find out more about your stuff, we go to where?
You can find everything about me at brucecordell.com, or you can also follow me on G+, Bruce Cordell on Google+. That's probably where I'm most active.
And Torah, was there anything that you're working on currently?
I'm working on a number of things, including a game which is not ready yet. I blog at torahcottrill.com.
Awesome.
Wasn't there a short story anthology?
There are several short story anthologies. Thank you for asking.
One of them is The Awakened, which is supposed to be out in October, at least as a PDF, and the print is coming out a month or so after that. Which has, people like Greg Greenwood and Eric Scott DeBee and Julie Johnson.
And there's also By Fairy Light by Scott Gable.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we really appreciate you guys being on the very first episode with us.
I had a great time. Good job, you guys.
Pick up my tab, okay?
I will, and I will cover your escape as you dash out the door. Stick around. After these messages, we will be back with myself, Ross, and John.
In a world of perilous adventure, the forces of evil have triumphed. Those who remain uncorrupted by wickedness must rely upon monsters to fight against the darkness. Hi, I'm Ross Watson, and I'm talking about my new setting for the Savage Worlds RPG called Accursed. Accursed is a dark fantasy setting where classic monsters team up to fight witches, where the heroes must choose whether to embrace the curse that gives them monstrous power or reject it and try to regain their lost humanity. Check us out at www.accursed.com or search for Accursed RPG on Kickstarter. Our campaign runs through October 13th, and we need your support to help make this world come to life. We're back with John Kovalic and Darryl Mott Jr.
Let's get back to something we were just discussing. John, you were just talking about how tabletop gaming is kind of a thing in the culture. According to ICV2, which is one of the reporting agencies for independent gaming, the gaming industry has grown by 20% per year for the past 5 fiscal years, and is one of the few entertainment industries that does have an upward scope on it. It's one of the few industries that is still growing compared to music and TV and film. Yet we're in an increasingly digital age. Everyone has smartphones, everyone has tablets, everyone has computers. Why is it that sitting around a table playing a board game or a role-playing game or a card game or miniature war game is so popular with people, and why it's growing so much?
I think it's growing so much because the word is getting out that this is a terrific way to spend time. For the last decade or so, I've been going to Germany. Munchkin and Dork Tower have both had very large followings in Germany. And you go to Germany and you go to the Essen game show, Spiel. And it is huge. It is, I couldn't tell the exact numbers, but it's always seemed to me to be significantly larger than Gen Con. And it's simply filled with families. Essen is very different, Spiel is very different from Gen Con in that it is, for the most part, general gaming. Board games, social games, party games. There's a very large role-playing presence there, but it's accepted in Germany. Board gaming is huge as a social activity in Germany. And I think the United States is only just starting to catch up with this. The fact that the game of the year, the Spiel des Jahres, forgive my pronunciation there.
Your pronunciation is probably better than mine because I speak no German whatsoever.
He said in a French accent.
Let's get back to hearing about Essen and this the big game at Essen this year. What were you saying about that, John?
Oh, well, just the fact that the award, the Spiel des Jahres, I forgive me,
Game of the Year
listeners to this podcast. Game of the Year at Essen is a huge deal. This award will have significant sales impact on the game. And it will essentially rocket a game to be a national bestseller. There's no real such award in the States. I mean, the gaming is not so imbued in the public consciousness yet. But what we've been seeing here is with Will Wheaton's Tabletop.
That's like an award.
It's like an award. Will is fantastic, and he is such a great ambassador for gaming. And I mean, the fact that, okay, you will now walk through the game section of Target, for example, and there is Pandemic on the shelves. There is Ticket to Ride. There is Carcassonne.
Settlers of Catan, Munchkin Legends.
Yes, there is that. But what we've got are these wonderful games hitting a mainstream audience. That has simply never been the case. And at least in the 35 years I've been gaming. You would, back when I started gaming, you would occasionally find Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe if you were lucky, you would find Traveller at a Shopko or a store like that. Otherwise, you'd have to go to these wonderful local game stores, which were terrific and which I adored, which I've got such a deep affection for. But yeah, I really do feel like the United States is starting to catch up to what much of the rest of the Western world has known for a while. games are fantastic. They are relatively inexpensive if you consider the hours of enjoyment and entertainment you can get from them. You can get 4 people playing Ticket to Ride for a couple of hours. And, what does that cost now? $40? That's the price of a movie. But they will go and play that game again with other friends. And then they will play it again with other friends. And they might buy the app and they'll keep playing that. And they will try Ticket to Ride Europe. Or maybe they'll go move to Carcassonne trying to find something else. The actual, dollar value in gaming is amazing. And again, as I was saying, there's this wonderful social interaction. I am not a very competitive gamer. When it comes to role-playing, when it comes to board games, when it comes to miniature games, I don't want to be, I do not wish to go in for the cutthroat game. I want a really fun, enjoyable time.
It's a good thing Munchkin's not very competitive, right? If I understand what John is saying, I think he's saying that the culture of gaming in America is changing, and is changing due to things like tabletop sort of celebrating games and what makes them good, and people are paying attention to that, like they pay attention to Essenspiel in Germany.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. It is starting to become a very real mainstream thing, and that is fantastic.
And to touch on a subject that John brought up, it may have to do something with the economy we have right now. A lot of people are looking to entertainment avenues that aren't as... Now, gaming has a very, very high initial buy-in. If you want to go buy Ticket to Ride or Settlers of Catan or D&D, the core rulebooks, you're looking at a $50 to $100 investment. But that investment can ride you out for so long on your entertainment dollar compared to, say, movies where the tickets, like, I think the cheapest ticket I can get in my area, which again, I live in buttfuck Texas, is $8 or $9.
Precisely.
Yeah, and the ROI you get on a board game or role-playing game is several hours, hundreds of hours in some cases.
If you take care of a board game, it will last you for almost forever. You may have to end up buying another copy to replace some of the cardboard tile pieces that you wear out eventually if you play a game like Small World or something, or some of the Euro-style games where they have a lot of tiles. But it's so insane how low the bar to entry is compared to a lot of other entertainment hobbies like movies, which is $10 to $30 for a Blu-ray, or $10 to $15 for a ticket to the theater, or music, which is like $20, $30, $40, $60, $80, $120 for a ticket to go see a punk band that so I'm like, I'm not paying $120 to go see a goddamn punk band.
But we're paying that for games that will last us for weeks at a time, and we can be social with them. I think that's John's other point, is that it's a social event that you're getting together with your friends and doing. It's not just you sort of sitting in front of that console for hours on end, talking to 12-year-olds on the internet. You're actually dealing with other adults or peers, or if you're not an adult.
Because you can get that same sort of experience through something like Skyrim, where sure, there's hours and hours and hours and hours of content that you're paying $60 for, but you're staring at a screen. And it may be a sort of reflection of our culture where everyone's, let me look down at my smartphone every 3 seconds and check Twitter or check something else, as opposed to when you're playing a game, you're sitting around a table looking eye to eye with the people you're playing with. It's a mandatory social aspect to the game.
And I don't necessarily think it's because we've become such an electronic-based society. I think we've just reached this kind of tipping point where people realize gaming is awesome. Tabletop gaming is wonderful. And it's just, various reasons behind this. I'm not sure if anybody can pinpoint what exactly it was or what a combination of factors it was. I think if people really, if Ticket to Ride and if Carcassonne and if Settlers had been available alongside Cosmic Encounter, back in the day, back in the late 70s, early 80s, and had the components been better and had it been, less of this need to go into these, at the time, obscure game shops to find these really good games, maybe that might have jump-started this whole explosion in tabletop gaming.
So availability is a factor.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, you've got this general, possibly overstating it, the geeks control the world, but so much of geekdom is mainstream. And now that you've got all of these folks who've grown up on these games, who've loved these games, who've adored these games, suddenly being accepted, it's nothing, people who love these games want to share their love with other people. They want to grab people and say, come, look at this fantastic thing I've discovered. To have this experience here, let's settle Catan. Let's build this rail line from Los Angeles to Miami.
Which is a bitch and a half, for the record.
Yeah, I hate Miami, by the way. I avoid Miami. I avoid, no disrespect, any Texas routes.
I was about to say, you're talking to two Texans.
But one thing about gaming is that it's very adaptable. As a thing, if we want to get together, you can have young professionals that can come over and play a game, and they will, have a fulfilling experience, and it could be a family game too. If you want to invite someone over and they've got kids and well, I got to do something with the kids, well, you can come over and play a game. Or if you got, it's just a very adaptable hobby. It doesn't just appeal to one group.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of professional people getting into tabletop gaming. They all have the same thing where they're looking for something that's entertainment, that's cheap and effective, and you get these people who start building game nights every single week. The same sort of people who used to watch Martha Stewart and plan dinner parties are now doing the same sort of thing around their weekly Settlers of Catan game.
Exactly. And one of the things...
I got to say something really quick. We have something that's really awesome is in Austin we have singles game night on a meetup, which I was like, really? We have a singles gaming night? I think that's awesome.
One of the big singles websites is starting to sponsor in major cities game nights for singles to meet each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the big things I think which has changed in the last 20 or 30 years is not simply that the games have gotten better, the rules writing has gotten a hell of a lot better. Games are easier to access. I mean, these relatively more, I don't want to say complex, but...
Avalon Hill.
Avalon Hill, yes. I went back, and games that I remember as being simple games back in the early 80s, there's a game in Britain called The Mystic Woods, and there was an Avalon Hill game, I can't even think of the name of it. But anyway, I picked up a copy for my brother because he adores Magic Realm. I think that was the name of the game. Yes, Magic Realm. And the rules are borderline indecipherable. It's really stunning. And you look at a game, and with Out of the Box, I'm a co-owner of Out of the Box, and we did Apples to Apples and dozens more games. Boy, we spent a lot of time trying to make the rules just really easy and just simplifying them, communicating what the idea of the game was so that people could learn the game quickly and be playing it quickly. As lovely as a game, as lovely as games, and as fondly as I look back on games like Empires of the Middle Ages from the 80s or Air War, oh my goodness, those rules were not well written. And that's kind of been an art we have learned over time as an industry.
Agreed. I mean, you look at something like Twilight Imperium, which is a great game, but it requires you to sit down for 5 to 6 hours to finish it. And there's a lot of games out there now that are working on getting that time frame down to 1 hour, 2 hours, something you can play even during your lunch break if you want to. Apples to Apples is a good example.
Yeah, and we had a lot of people tell us that they would play Apples to Apples over the lunch hour. And there's nothing wrong with a good, 2, 3, 4 hour game if you get into that. Part of the joy of what is the Games Workshop Talisman is that these games would go on, and you would just get lost in them, and that's terrific. But also, it's kind of like...
But that's a different level of commitment.
Exactly. So it's sort of the difference between a good novel and a good short story. And many of these games were not good novels. They were games that didn't need to be 4 hours. Some of them did. Some of them were wonderful. Most of them did not need to go on as long as they did. They're so well written, and they're so... the points are made so concisely and so clearly.
If you look at the rules for first edition and compare them to the playtest edition of D&D Next, it's night and fucking day between the two. But they both have the same feel of, I'm exploring something, I'm going in, and God knows if I'll get out. It's very adventure feeling again, compared to 4th edition Pathfinder, 3rd edition.
Well, I don't know if I totally agree with you there, Darryl. I think those old rules, I mean, it's a different style altogether, but I'm not sure I would say they're better written. It's definitely a different approach, and I think if you were to say something like that games today generally have better rules writing than in the past, I would agree. Like, Torg is a game I love. I love it to death, but its rules are very difficult to understand. And there's good reasons for why that is, but nowadays you don't really find that as an issue. People are able to, especially with games that are a little more rules light, like Savage Worlds or Fate, they are getting better at communicating how those rules are meant to be used. I'm
a Traveler fanatic. That was my game. I went to Queen Mary College, London, to study astrophysics before transferring to the University of Wisconsin-Madison to study economics because of n-dimensional tensor calculus. But I love GURPS, and I love Traveler. But I don't think I will disagree with you. I don't think it's a question of simplistic rules. I think it's that games manufacturers are able to better express their ideas. We've had close to 40 years of game writing history. And for the most part, the Numenera...
We've evolved. The rules writing has evolved.
Exactly. The rules aren't simplistic. The ideas are just expressed more clearly.
I agree with that. That's a very good point.
Let's go. Drinks up, everyone.
I thank you for the warning. I thrust my loot into my backpack and prepare to rush off while hastily mentioning my latest party game, ROFL, ROFL, exclamation point, has just been released by Cryptozoic Games. It's a party game which I have both created and illustrated, which essentially takes it's been described various ways. Some people call it texting made into a game. Some people call it the license plate game made into a board game. Others call it Name That Tune with phrases. But that is now out, and the reviews have been fantastic. I've been very happy with that. I'm working on yet another Munchkin supplement, which I cannot announce yet because Steve Jackson Games has not announced it. But Munchkin Pathfinder should be getting into stores soon, and I'm enormously happy with how Munchkin Pathfinder turned out. I'm enormously happy with Munchkin Legends, which is now in Target and is exclusive to Target.
And Munchkin Legends is... if it has not yet, it will soon get a glowing review from Antical News Tabletop. But I've got to say, as much as I appreciate the authenticity to Greek mythology, fuck whoever put 23 goddamn curses in the deck.
I will
because
admit,
I got 18 of them. I counted.
I've got to admit, whenever I'm drawing a new Munchkin deck, getting through the curses is the hardest part, just because they're all laying there. I see the art specs and it goes alphabetically, and there's a few A's, a few B's, and oh my god, look at all those curses. Once I get past drawing the curses, it's all cruising.
It's all downhill.
It is. And there is going to be, I'd hoped this month to have some big news about Dork Tower, but that's going to have to be postponed for a couple of months just because it has been so incredibly busy. But there is some really fun, exciting stuff coming with Dork Tower. So it's been
fantastic.
Well, make sure to keep an eye on that.
Where can we find your information on the interwebs?
The easiest place is just to go to dorktower.com, and from there you can find me on Twitter, on the Twitters, where I'm ridiculously active, and also
the Twitter,
and also on Facebook. I am muskrat_John on Twitter. But yeah, dorktower.com. We'll have everything. And I see the Queen's Guard rushing in, so I've got to rush out. But thank you guys so much for having me on the inaugural podcast here.
Thank you for listening to the You All Meet in a Tavern podcast. This podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons and no derivative and non-commercial license. Please visit us at gamerstavern.org for even more gaming fun. I would like to personally thank our guests this evening, Bruce Cordell, Torah Cottrill, and John Kovalic, for taking the time out of their busy schedules to be with us. Until next time, the tavern is closed.
In a world of perilous adventure, the forces of evil have triumphed. Those who remain uncorrupted by wickedness must rely upon monsters to fight against the darkness. Hi, I'm Ross Watson, and I'm talking about my new setting for the Savage Worlds RPG called Accursed. Accursed is a dark fantasy setting where classic monsters team up to fight witches, where the heroes must choose whether to embrace the curse that gives them monstrous power, or reject it and try to regain their lost humanity. Check us out at www.accursed.com or search for Accursed RPG on Kickstarter. Our campaign runs through October 13th, and we need your support to help make this world come to life.